The following is a Rogers Community Television special presentation.
In July of 1955, both the Mercury and the City of London hit 100. In the middle of a sweltering heat wave, Londoners came out to welcome band leader Guy Lombardo for a special homecoming concert. Dundas Street was clogged for hours with a mammoth centennial parade. The Western Fair Grandstand hosted the year's Miss Canada pageant, and local singer Priscilla Wright appeared on that weekend's Ed Sullivan Show. Birthday celebrations didn't come any bigger.
This is a kind of a theater too, and like most of the old theaters of the old days in London, it hasn't got any air conditioning.
But the real news that summer was 44-year-old writer Orlo Miller. His historical romance, This Was London, played to sold-out crowds at the Grand Theatre. It was an ideal chance for the popular historian to combine his twin loves of heritage and creative writing. In Miller's hands, the story of his hometown of London could be a tragedy, a comedy, or a triumph. But it never could be dull.
I beg, sir, to state these ideas. They lead to the propriety of establishing a capital of Upper Canada, which may be somewhat distant from the center of the present colony. This capital I propose to be established at New London. John Graves Simcoe, Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada.
The whole idea of London begins with John Graves Simcoe. John Graves Simcoe was a military man. He was a hero during the American Revolutionary War. He was also extremely wealthy. He achieved great wealth when he married his wife Elizabeth, who today is known as a famous landscape painter. And he was a man who probably could have lived happily on his estate with his many children for the rest of his life. But he was a man who wanted a lot more.
What Simcoe wanted was a capital for the new colony of Upper Canada. British officials, fearing raids from the rebellious United States, were eager to move their legislature away from the border. Simcoe went to extremes and chose a site miles away from the nearest settlement. The only likely transportation route was a nearby river that early French explorers had aptly christened the Ditch. Despite the area's shortcomings, the lieutenant governor was determined to make his vision a reality. Elizabeth Simcoe even sketched a plan for her husband's capital, complete with a villa for herself. The trouble was, neither John Graves Simcoe nor the British government had any right to the land.
If you go out into the woods, let's say, you know, and you stand there and stand very quiet, and you listen to the sounds of the woods. You know, you can hear the wind through the trees. You can hear the birds in the distance. You can hear the small creatures underfoot. Can you own that? European man, Western man talks about ownership and fee simple title. A piece of paper will give you title. It's not the same concept in the Aboriginal world.
At least 3 different tribes lived in Western Ontario at the time of Simcoe's visit, and generations of natives had occupied the land for thousands of years before that. Some establishing settlements, others migrating with the seasons. Although Simcoe was considered a sympathetic British officer, he was determined to secure the property for his capital. Ultimately, his vision of London would have a contentious land treaty as its foundation.
And peoples of the Chippewa Nation of Indians, being desirous for a certain consideration hereafter shown of selling and disposing of a certain parcel or tract of land lying on and near to the river unto His Britannic Majesty, King George III, our great father. For and in consideration of the sum of 800 pounds Quebec currency value.
Now,
in
those are the
goods
words that are
estimates,
reflected on the
according to
treaty.
Montreal price,
Sell,
now delivered
alienate,
to
bargain.
us, the receipt whereof.
Those are real estate terms that are not translatable in some cases into modern Ojibwe. So when you look at the words on the treaty, it says for the Township of London, in the year 1796, 132,000 acres of land is sold to the British Crown by the Chippewa Nation of Indians. Now, if those words aren't translatable into Chippewa or Ojibwe, therefore the people at the time could not have been selling the land. They'd be talking in terms of sharing and opening up the borders to welcome people to land.
The stripping of Aboriginal culture began before the treaty was signed. Simcoe rejected the natives' title for the river, Askunasipi, and named it after the Thames of his native England. After toying with the name Georgiana for his new capital, he opted for New London. For better or worse, the settlement would exist in a British orbit for nearly 2 centuries. But London's founder would leave only one permanent reminder of his visit. Simcoe ordered his troops to cut a trail from Burlington Bay to the Thames River. As the area's first road, it would be named after his friend Henry Dundas, a British cabinet minister who frequently smoothed out arguments between Simcoe and Lord Dorchester.
John Graves Simcoe and Guy Carleton, later Lord Dorchester, were an interesting contrast in personalities. John Graves Simcoe was 41 in 1793, an ambitious man, a man on the make. Guy Carleton was in his late 60s, very reserved, and quite frankly couldn't stand Simcoe. The two men argued frequently, and eventually what happened was that Simcoe was told by Dorchester, "Your plans for London are crazy. I'm not going to support them. Set up your capital in York and forget about the forks of the Thames."
Dejected, the lieutenant governor and his family retired to the chosen capital, a former trading post native bands called Toronto. Simcoe would spend a miserable winter on the shores of Lake Ontario, brooding about his failed dream. When he died 13 years later, London would still be a wilderness. During the War of 1812, several large estates along the coast of Lake Erie were ransacked by invading American troops. But it was rumored that the vandalism to one property was done by vengeful locals against the man who controlled settlement in the area. His name was Thomas Talbot. No person had a more controversial role in the development of southwestern Ontario than Colonel Thomas Talbot. Praised as a great man of history in popular plays and films, he was also scorned as an ogre by historians. However, London wouldn't have existed without him.
All kinds of stuff came this way far before other areas, and it's only because Talbot made sure that before you got any kind of land grant, you would have to occupy that land, you would have to build a structure, you would have to consistently live there and do something with it. And whereas other areas were, snapped up by speculators, sort of absentee speculators, who did diddly with their acquisitions.
Talbot succeeded in spite of himself. He had always seen himself as the baron of a Western Ontario colony. But the vision never worked out. Most settlers refused to take the claim seriously. Talbot's blunt personality didn't help matters.
The colonel told us that a few days before, a tall Yankee came and looked in at his window. "What do you want?" asked the colonel sharply. "I've been 4 days in Talbot settlement," answered the stranger, "and I wish to see its founder." "Well, you have seen him," said the colonel. "Now go away." Sir James E. Alexander.
What drove such a mean and crotchety guy to come over here and give all that energy to the development of this new land? And there is a rumor, it's never been confirmed, that he was spurned by some woman and had to put an ocean between himself and his torment. He'd come over here once before with Simcoe and thought, ah, sod it. Life's just a crock anyway. I'll go over to the new land and give the settlers a rough time, and in that way make my mark, perhaps. So I like to think that we benefited from the heartbreak of Thomas Talbot.
But there was no doubt Talbot's settlement plan worked. In the 20 years following his arrival in 1803, the population of southern Ontario grew from a handful of fur trappers to over 40,000 landowners in nearly 30 newly created townships. Even the area around the forks of the Thames River was attracting scattered settlement. And then, an act of fate helped speed up the process.